All right. Lights Out, Chapter 45, Part 2. After checking one last time to make sure everyone understood their assignments, Mark moved off to neutralize the guard. His plan was to sneak up behind him when he was looking the other way and pistol whip him. Gunny thrust a sheathed bayonet into his hands before he left, and he stuck it down the waist of his pants. He moved to the garage doors on the side of the house and peeked around the corner. He couldn't help but notice how well manicured the flower bed was. Too bad he'd have to run through it to get the guard, who was a little bigger than he was and muscular. He was dressed mostly in leather and had an AR-15 slung around his neck. The man took a drag off of his cigarette and then threw the butt out in the rain. Mark watched him look from side to side in a slow, sweeping motion. Okay, he thought, next time he turns his head the other way, I'll go. He pulled his Colt out of the holster and turned it the wrong way. It would make an effective hammer. Mark knew from his karate training just where to hit to turn off the man's lights. When the guard should have started turning his head the other way, he didn't. Mark wondered if the man had seen him. It wasn't likely. The moonlight just barely penetrated the rain clouds, and the light coming out of the window behind the man would not help his night vision. Then the leather-clad biker stepped off of the small porch and turned down the sidewalk that led almost straight to where Mark was standing. Oh shit, Mark thought. He pulled his head back around the corner and flattened his body against the garage door as much as he could. His eyes shifted from side to side as if he were looking to see if Murphy had somehow tagged along on this little adventure. Shit, that was all he could think. Knocking the man out was no longer an option. He put the Colt back into his holster and pulled out the bayonet. It was black and sharpened down both sides. The filed edges of the blade glimmered slightly in the pale light. Mark looked at them and shuddered. He'd never killed a man with a knife before. He wondered how it would feel to be so close to someone as life ebbed out of them. It suddenly occurred to him it could be his life that could end. Fucking Murphy, he thought, as he coiled his body to strike the guard. He could smell the man getting closer. It was a foul combination of body odor, cigarettes, and beer. Mark prayed that the beer smell was fresh. Perhaps the alcohol would slow the man's reactions a little bit. Suddenly it appeared that perhaps Murphy wasn't around. The guard walked right past Mark, never turning his head to look that way. He crossed the driveway, stopping behind the Blazer, leaned his rifle against the back bumper of the 4x4 and stretched. Then, with his back to the house, he stepped to the edge of the concrete, unzipped his pants, and began to relieve himself. Mark almost couldn't believe his luck. Not only could he go back to Plan A, but now the man was away from the house. Mark stuffed the knife back into his waistband and unholstered his pistol again. He quickly tiptoed toward the man. When he was about 5 feet away, he raised the pistol. Clank! The bayonet had fallen from his waistband and hit the driveway. Mark froze. Murphy was here after all. The guard's head snapped around and he saw Mark. Mark, wishing he hadn't stopped, charged the man. If he'd been drinking, it hadn't slowed his reflexes much. He turned and raised his left arm to stop Mark's blow, and his right lashed out a meaty fist to collide with Mark's midsection. Mark hadn't been hit that hard since his black belt test. The man knocked the wind out of him, and all he could do was wrap up the biker and let his momentum take them to the ground. Somehow the bigger man was able to twist around, so he ended up on top. His arm ended up across Mark's throat. That, coupled with the punch and the man's weight, which felt considerably more than Mark had previously estimated. I'll get this thing clipped on. All right. That, coupled with the punch and the man's weight, which felt considerably more than Mark had previously estimated, landing on top, put him in a precarious position. All he could hear was the blood pounding in his ears. The pistol and the hand that held it had ended up behind his back when they fell, and he couldn't pull it out. Mark figured he had enough oxygen to try one move. He relaxed for a split second, then thrust his hips up as fast and hard as he could. He was surprised at how easily he threw the man off. He rolled over on his stomach to get up and could see why he had come off so easily. His assault team had come to help him. They were now standing around the man who was on his back. His fly was still gaping open, and his forehead had the crosshatch pattern of a metal butt plate from an AR-15 across it. He was out cold. The only person with an AR was Ed. He looked at the downed biker with hatred and disgust. "Let's get the girl," he whispered. The 6 of them lined up in the predetermined order at the front door. Mark crouched down and tried the knob. He could hear the girl scream as he turned it. Thankfully, it wasn't locked. Mark held the door closed until he felt the 2 pats on his shoulder that he knew had been passed up the line to tell him that every man was ready. He pushed the door open and entered the room, still in his crouch, moving to the right. The house was an older ranch-style home, and the front door opened into a large living room that was connected to the kitchen by a bar. A Coleman lantern sat on it, hissing. Mark's job was to use his pistol to clear, right to left, anyone close enough to the door to impede the entry team, and then to concentrate on the next closest target. As he moved into the room far enough to allow the men behind him access, he knew that Scott had the same assignment for the left side with his Glock. Mark caught a glimpse of the young girl. 2 of the men had her trapped in the corner of the room, and they were jabbing at her with big Bowie knives and making her scream. Some of the men and women were sitting on the furniture watching the show and laughing. Fortunately, none of the MZBs were close to the door. Mark had moved into the room far enough for the 2 men assigned to his side to follow him, and he dropped to one knee. Ed was right behind him with the AR. His job was to start in the middle and clear to the right. Ted was his mirror for the left side with his AK. Dwight was the 5th man in, and he was using one of the community AKs. He was charged with watching the room for any threats that the first 4 missed. Victor was last in, and with the short-barreled shotgun was to watch all the doors into the room for anyone coming through them. The entry plan had gone perfectly in the first second and a half. The MZBs, distracted by the goings-on in the corner, were just starting to notice that something wasn't right. Mark yelled, "Police! Freeze!" He prayed that the MZBs would give up, but mostly he hoped they'd left Murphy outside with the unconscious man. Mark's first prayer was to go unanswered. The MZ closest to him raised a shotgun. Before he could get it up, Mark shot him twice in the chest. The shotgun dropped, and the man just stood there. All hell broke loose from behind Mark. Mark shifted his attention to the next closest MZB. He saw a muzzle flash from the man's revolver, and he covered the man's center of mass with his front sight. His finger pressed the trigger, and the gun bucked in his hand. When the sight came back down, he pressed again. The man fell to the floor as if a cable had pulled him down. The next MZB was leveling a black rifle directly at him. He raced his Colt toward the man, knowing that he had to beat him. Oh, man. Mark could see down the opening of the barrel of the rifle. The hole looked to be the size of a 5-gallon bucket. He was too late. His sights weren't lined up, and he saw the evil grin of the MZB as his finger tightened on the trigger. Mark feared that the look on the man's face would be the last thing he would ever see. Out of the blue, a man grew a third eye. It was small and red and right in the middle of the other 2. Mark realized that Ed had just saved his life. He continued to sweep the room for threats, but the only one left was one of the MZBs with a knife. He now stood behind the girl with the blade to her neck. Mark aimed his pistol at the man's head, but he only stuck enough of it out to be able to see. Mark didn't feel confident that he could take such a close shot at the girl, to the girl. She was limp in the big biker's arms. Mark didn't know if she'd been killed, injured, or if she'd just fainted. Mark decided to try to talk the man out. "If you kill her, there's no way you're going to get out of here alive." His voice sounded funny, like he was hearing things underwater. He realized that all of the gunfire had affected his hearing. "Let her go." "You'll kill me anyway," the man shouted. "No, we won't. Let her go and we'll just turn you over to the police." "You said you were the police." "You're going to kill me no matter what. You put your guns down and let me out of here with her." "I'll let her go after—" Bam! Mark flinched at the loud noise. He saw the knife fall, then the girl, and then the man with a third of his head gone dropped to the floor. Mark looked around and saw Ed with the AR still on his shoulder with smoke snaking out of the barrel. "That was for my sister, asshole," he shouted at the man who would never hear the words. Then he slung the weapon like he had carried it every day of his life and rushed over to the girl. He picked her up in his arms and started crying. "I'm sorry, Ashley. I'm sorry for not being there." His sobbing increased, and the words became unintelligible. Mark wondered how he knew the girl's name, then realized there was no way he could. Ashley must have been his sister. Victor put a hand on Ed's shoulder and led him to the bar. The bigger man moved the lantern, which miraculously had not been hit, and helped Ed place her on the counter. Victor felt for her pulse. "I think she's okay," Victor said. Mark looked at the girl for the first time. She appeared to be Asian. She was extremely pretty, even with a black eye and a fat lip. He couldn't tell how old she was. Between 17 and 20, he would guess. She had on a khaki pair of shorts and a Baylor sweatshirt. Mark stood up. His leg must have gone to sleep while he was kneeling. He turned around and asked if anyone on his team had been hit. "Just you," Ted answered, pointing to Mark's leg. Mark looked down and saw that his left leg was covered in blood. He took a wobbly step backwards and leaned against the wall. Scott rushed over to help him. He eased himself down to the floor with the help. He couldn't believe that it didn't hurt. Scott pulled out his knife and started cutting the fabric away from where the blood was coming from. Mark watched in fascination as if he were seeing it on television. Rob appeared from nowhere with Manny and Joe. He ordered the unoccupied men to check for survivors, and he sent Victor to get the first aid kit. Manny, Joe, and Dwight checked all the MZBs. Only one of them was still alive. His breathing was rapid and shallow. Before Victor could get back with the first aid kit, it had stopped. Rob kneeled down beside Mark and looked at the wound in his hamstring. Rob had him roll onto his stomach, and he finished tearing away the jeans. "Looks like it passed right through the meat. Exit hole is the same size as the entry hole. Probably a small caliber handgun. Does it hurt?" "Not really, no." "Well, it will. Gonna leave a nice scar, too. Something you can brag about to the ladies," Rob said with a hint of humor in his voice. Pause it. Stop.